Today's session is going to be about microaggressions, which is one of my favorite topics. And I want to first talk about some language that I often use when I talk about microaggressions. And part of this language is part of beginning to change the rhetoric, to shift the paradigm about good and bad when we start talking about how these things happen, who's impacted, who's harmed. So the three terms that I like to use are receiver, which is the person who's the target of the microaggression. I'm going to use myself as an example a lot during this call. So as a Black person, as a queer person, as a disabled person, so many different identities I have, I receive a lot of microaggressions. So I'm the target of microaggressions. And the targets are because of my group identity. So someone might say something because I'm Black, because I'm queer, because I'm hearing impaired, because I'm fat, whatever the reason is, right? But it's something about my group identity, not about me, that's leading the person to make these comments. The second term I use is the actor, and that's the person who said or did the thing. So they're saying it even if they don't think it's because of my membership, my group membership. It actually is, and I'll share some more about that in a little bit. But the actor is the person who said or did the thing. And then the third group, the third category that often comes up when we talk about microaggressions is the bystander, the person who is watching what happened. The bystander often has an interesting role. So for instance, if someone's making a microaggression towards me because I'm Black, but you happen to be East Indian, it's not directed at you because you're Black, but since it's a racial microaggression, you might still be really impacted by it, right? Because it's not about your specific race, but it's still a racial microaggression. So a bystander can be both not the target and also experience themselves as the target when they experience a microaggression. So bystanders have a really tricky role to walk, and we'll talk about all three roles. Part of the reason I like using this language, and it's coming from the work of Dominic Barter, who's a nonviolent communication trainer, is that it's helping us to move away from some of the normal language that we use for these roles, right? So instead of receiver, we often talk about the victim. Instead of the actor, we often talk about the perpetrator. And so both of those terms tend to be very stigmatizing. When I think about being a victim, I've lost a little bit of my agency. I feel powerless. I'm the person waiting to be saved, right? And I don't want to be that person. I want to have all of my agency, even as I experience harm. When we talk about the perpetrator, we often immediately think of perpetrator equals the bad person, the person we need to cast out of our community. And again, it starts to set up this good-bad dynamic that we're trying to move away from. So this is the language that I'll be using today. Just wanted to orient everyone. So the next question that often comes up when I talk about microaggressions, and someone wrote this really heartfelt concern about the class that I do on microaggressions is, I hate the term microaggressions. And the person said, there's nothing micro about it. And it almost feels like gaslighting to call some of these behaviors microaggressions because it implies that they're small. And so I like naming where this term came from. This language is actually coming from the field of sociology, where people are contrasting macro and micro, right? And when we talk about the macro level of analysis in socioeconomics, we're talking about large group interactions. So things that are around social structures, looking at whole population effects. When we talk about micro in socioeconomics, we're talking about, sociology, even socioeconomics is an even smaller branch of that. When we talk about it in sociology, we're talking about the relationships between people. So the macro scale is looking at groups, micro is looking at the differences between individuals. Neither term is meant to say anything about the intensity or about the degree of harm, right? So macro aggressions, some of the laws and policies that we have can have huge harm, can result in people's death. And the same thing with microaggressions. Microaggressions, an example of a microaggression that leads to death, are things like, the years of lynching that happened in the United States. Those were still considered microaggressions because they were happening at that interpersonal level. But they were costly, they were horrendous, they were huge amount of harm. So part of what I'm really wanting folks to understand is if we're talking about the level of analysis and not about the degree of harm when we use the terms macro and micro. I want to define these terms. I'm first going to define them and then kind of summarize them. So there are two definitions that I love. The first definition is the classic definition, and it comes from a person who everyone kind of really associates with the study of microaggressions, especially in psychology, Dr. Daryl Wing Su. And he's an Asian American psychologist who has done amazing work for the last, my gosh, I think it's 40 years now, looking at microaggressions. Isn't that amazing? And he defines microaggressions as brief, commonplace, daily verbal, behavioral, environmental indignities, right? So already think about what we're talking about. They can be really quick. They happen all the time, and they can take many different forms. And they can be intentional or unintentional, and that they communicate hostile, derogative, or negative slights and insults towards people from historically marginalized groups. So the other key thing to think about here is this idea that they're communicating a message. Microaggressions are not neutral. They're always giving this hidden message. The other definition that I love, I recently came across as I was doing more research for the books, and it's from a wonderful African-American psychologist named Monica Williams. And she defines them as deniable acts of bias that reinforce pathological stereotypes and inequitable social norms. And I think these two definitions go together really well because they complement each other. When I think about what's missing from the first definition is this idea of they're often denied, right? When microaggressions happen, people are often saying, no, you misunderstood me. That's not what I meant. And people have no sense, like, wait a second, but something just happened and I know it happened, but they're so easily denied. And then the other piece that I think is really important in Dr. Williams' definition is that it talks a lot about the purpose of microaggressions, whether or not that purpose is intentional. Whether or not I intend this purpose, they are still strategies that reinforce stereotypes. They basically tell people from these historically marginalized groups, you need to know your place. You need to know where you belong, right? And so it's really important to acknowledge that microaggressions are not neutral. They have this specific impact. I want to check and see if there are any questions about either of these definitions before I go on to just like a quick summary of microaggressions. I love questions because they give me a little bit of feedback, like, this is what people are getting from what I'm saying or how it's landing in both. So question or a comment?
Roxy, I have a question.
Okay, Nina.
I think for myself as a white body, I often miss microaggressions.
Absolutely.
So I'm just curious as a bystander, hopefully not as an actor, but I'm sure I am. But how I can be like, I don't know, like I would like to raise my awareness of being the bystander of microaggressions.
Absolutely. I mean, I honestly think that one of the best ways, and this is like one of the things I love, one of the few things that we could say we love about the internet, is that if you're wanting to learn how to raise your awareness about microaggressions, there is a ton of resources out there. And I'm going to make sure that I put into the chat this amazing tool. There's actually this microaggressions encyclopedia now, and it goes through a gazillion microaggressions, helps you understand why it's a microaggression, and gives examples. So I'll make sure I put that into the chat. And I didn't add it to the slides, so I'll add it to the slides before I share the slides with everyone so that you can go to it. But for me, it's like just start looking at them, looking and seeing how people are talking about them. And the more that you start to train yourself to recognize why someone might think something's a microaggression that you might not ever experience as a microaggression, the more we can understand.
Yeah, I hear that and I'm super excited about that, but it's okay. Let me just ask you this, because Keldwin just has something in the chat too. Like we had a picture day at school, and they kept talking for the administrators and the teachers, and the adults, and they kept saying things like, oh, we know orange is the color for today, and like nobody looks good in orange. And I'm thinking, what are they talking about? And I started to think, oh, the white bodies may not look great in orange. Like, is that a microaggression? Like, it's so sort of like, am I reading too much into it? I don't know. I don't know if
It's
that's going to be in the encyclopedia,
Yeah, I think I'm going to hold that question and come back to it because I think as we talk about what microaggressions are, I'll give you a framing to think about, is something a microaggression or not, and then we can apply to this one, okay?
Awesome. Thank you, Roxy.
Wonderful. And then whether or not the recording will be available, I plan to, and like I said, I plan to probably post this presentation, and it'll just be focused on my face, not all of you, so I won't do gallery view, on the site so that people can access it afterwards. And so if you need to go to bed, go to bed. And then, oh my gosh, and yes, Keldrin's question around, is it a microaggression if I say to a Black person, did I miss my Black friends? Can I get to know you? Hold on, we're going to come to that one also. So last question, Patrice.
It's not so much a question as another possible response to the, I might miss it. How can I know?
Mm-hmm.
I've been in situations where a person of color has said, hey, this thing didn't land well. And then some people who are white were insistent that it wasn't a problem. And
Mm-hmm.
if you're going to not maybe be aware, or you might miss something, if someone's saying it's a problem, it's a problem.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Absolutely. And I think that's always one of the things I talk about when I talk about the actor, that I understand why you might not see or have understood that something was a problem. But if someone tells you, ouch, that didn't work for me, that's a problem, I don't like what you did. If they yell at you, however they share this with you, they are giving you a gift. They are telling you, I am trying to make you aware of something that you don't know. And the best thing you can do in that moment is to say, wow, thank you. If you want to share more so I can understand, please do. And if you don't want to take on the job of educating me, I will go find out more about it. But it's how can we move away from this reflexive response of defending ourselves to being open to the information that's being given to us. I don't believe Sarah Peyton's on this call. She's going to be doing her own book launch event for a specific topic, I think on Thursday in a couple of days, but definitely this week. So not this call. Vika, I saw one last question and I'm really going to go into content.
I have two questions, actually. One probably super simple, and maybe someone can just post it in the chat. I'd like to know the definition of bias that you're using.
Okay.
Just for clarity. And something that came up while you were asking another question, and I just want to acknowledge, like, it came up, like I'm having a visceral reaction to this idea that no matter what, like, let's say we have a video recording of something. If anyone tells me that they experienced a microaggression from me, then a microaggression happened, and that's it, period, end of story.
So are you questioning if that's true?
Yes.
Okay, we'll talk some more about it, and I think I'll help clarify that as we go along today.
Okay, so my question really is, like, so people have nervous systems that distort perception, and
we can, like I said, we'll definitely talk about this. We'll definitely talk about this one. And then there was a question in the chat, because this is the book launch event with both Sarah and me, if Sarah's coming today. So I wanted to clarify, there are if you look at the book launch website, some events have just my name, and those will be only me teaching. Some have just Sarah's name, and she will be the only one teaching those. And some have both our names, and will both be there for the ones that have both of our names listed. So today's one with just me, okay? Okay, so then just kind of summarizing quickly what microaggressions are. They were introduced by Chester Pierce. So it's a long-standing term back in the 70s. This is not new woke ideology, okay? This is something that has been around for a really long time. They like I said, communicate those negative, hostile, derogatory messages. Really important one. They are connected to somebody's membership in a marginalized group that has less structural power. And I always want to highlight this one because I always have folks saying, well, I'm white, I'm male, I'm not disabled, but I experience bias. And so this goes back to the question of, well, what's bias? What's microaggression? So bias for me is when I treat somebody differently. I have a preference for a person or against a person because of their group membership. So I can clearly have bias towards a person who's white or against a person who's white, right? So bias can happen to anybody, regardless of their group identity. Microaggressions are a specific subset of bias that's connected to structural power. So microaggressions was meant to call out the idea that in our society, there are different levels of access to power. And microaggression is a form of bias that's tied to the lack of structural power. So if I am a woman and I'm experiencing a bias against men, for many, many, many long times, women didn't have structural power to have huge impacts for those bias, right? It's unpleasant, uncomfortable, yucky for the man who's experiencing that bias, but women weren't in positions of power where they could hire or fire men. Men were. And so there's something about looking at that structural, the way power flows in society. And when we talk about microaggressions, we're also including that level of who has the structural power in society. So everyone can experience bias. People from groups with less structural power experience microaggressions. And then, like I mentioned earlier, they can be verbal or nonverbal, occur all the time, as you will see, can be intentional or unintentional. And the part that makes us crazy, they're often not just unacknowledged, but not even seen. And I'm going to ask everyone to mute yourself if you can. I can also try to do it myself. Yes, that way we can have good sound quality. There's a video here on this slide. After the class, go look at this video if you haven't seen it, because it's really, really cool, okay? Now, I want to talk a little bit about the framework that I approach talking about microaggressions with. And this is an important part of why I wrote the book. Essentially, there needs to be a paradigm shift in how we talk about microaggressions and how we do anti-racist work. Because part of my goal is that we're trying to do this work in a way that lets everyone thrive, that isn't about changing someone who has no power and then giving them all the power and switching who's at the top, who's at the bottom, right? I want to get off the seesaw of who's thriving, who's not thriving. And so part of this paradigm shift is moving from moralistic judgments to needs-based judgments. So instead of talking about things as being evil or good, or, they're a demon, they're an angel, they're wonderful, or thinking about people who commit microaggressions as irredeemable, hopeless, or they're reformable, there's a chance with that person. Or even this idea that our truth is the absolute truth. Those are all part of the good, bad binary that actually contributes to a lot of pain and suffering in our world. And part of what I'm trying to invite us to is a new paradigm shift, one that's based on needs-based judgments. So when something happens, the question that I ask is this meeting my needs or is it not meeting my needs? Is it meeting the group needs or is it not meeting the group needs? Rather than automatically it's good or bad, right? I want to understand what are the needs that are met or not met. What's the cost or the impact of this thing that I'm observing? So things that are more costly are things that I might judge as bad, things that are less costly are things that I might judge as good. So the idea of good or bad in this paradigm is really about connecting to needs and connecting to cost, rather than there's an absolute truth and something is always good or person is always good or always bad. And absolutely, I love what Chris noted, that this good-bad binary is absolutely one of the traits of white supremacy thinking, right? That was part of the whole idea, was Black people are bad, Black people are subhuman, white people are good. And so having a firm belief in the idea that there's good and bad is part of what helps to fuel and sustain some of these white supremacy beliefs. So the vision that we're moving to instead is one of beloved community. And when I think about beloved community, I love this quote from my friend Kazuhaga. And in his book, Healing Resistance, he wrote, if you're not struggling to love people, if you're not trying to build understanding with the people you disagree with, then you're not really doing the work of beloved community, right? Beloved community is hard. It's hard work. The work of building beloved community is understanding that we're not trying to win over people, but to win people over. We're trying to reach hearts and minds. We're trying to help people see that even when they disagree with me, even when I hate what they're doing, I still want to find a way to see them as part of my family, part of the people that I'm invested in trying to find a way to help them understand why what they're doing isn't working, not just for me, but probably also for them, and how we could find a better way to let our larger human family thrive. So what does it mean to think about beloved community, to move towards beloved community, and especially to do anti-racist work with this lens? And there were a couple of things that were essential for me as I started to develop this, partly because I struggled with this, right? So I put the one I struggled with the most at the top of this list. Part of building beloved community is that I include my needs. I was always raised to be one of those good girls, the girls who are like, I can find belonging, I can find community, I can find acceptance from all of the white folks in the white circles I was in if I prioritized and took care of other people, if I always focused on their needs and took care of them, right? So even though I was having what I would now call negative peace, I wasn't building beloved community because I wasn't in that community. So beloved community, you absolutely have to include your own needs, okay? Huge, huge test. And I also include the needs of others. So beloved community is not about my needs only or your needs only. We're holding the whole. I seek to prevent harm and injustice, even and maybe especially to those who are not like me, right? So it's easy to think about beloved community when I think about the people in my family, the people in my community, the people that I say, these are the folks I like. It's a lot harder to think about including the folks that I see as my enemy, the person who's walking down the street in Charlottesville so many years ago carrying those tiki torches, to see that person as a member of my beloved community, right? And so it's really important that I want no one to experience harm. That's not the goal. I want no one to experience injustice. I also want to seek out and love the humanity of other people as a principled position, not as a tactical strategy. That means that I don't just drop thinking about you as human or trying to think about your needs when I get what I want. It's not just, I'm going to do this as long as a way to help you to say, yes, I'm on your side, I'm going to give you what you want, and then I drop you. I'm always, always, always thinking, is what I'm doing in this moment holding the whole? Whether or not you're in the room, whether or not you're on my side, I'm still holding this as a principled stance that's important to me. And I also think about working for everyone's freedom. And for me, this is really subtle because it's really clear to me how I'm working for the freedom of myself and folks from the global majority when I think about anti-racist work. But I also know that white folks are not free from the impacts of white supremacy culture. And so I'm also working for their freedom and working for everyone's freedom, both the ones who are benefiting from it and maybe leveraging it in ways that I don't like, but who don't recognize how they're suffering, and the ones who are clearly aware of how they're suffering under the systems that we have. I'm wanting everyone to be free of it. And this other piece is really important. I hold everyone, including myself, accountable to the creation of this vision. And what that means for me is that beloved community is not about being nice. It's not about being quiet. It's not about, going along to getting along. It's about being able to speak up, to name harm when it's happening, to call people in. And that is part of why I wanted to write the books, right? I wanted to give us a model for how do you speak up about this? How do you fearlessly, fiercely tell people when what they're doing is not okay, is causing harm, is not meeting needs, and still do it in a way that embraces them, that sees their humanity. And I think that's one of the things that we haven't had a lot of practice in doing. And I also like to conclude my little spiel about beloved community with a great quote from Bell Hooks, the great Bell Hooks. And they write, beloved community is formed not by the eradication of difference, not by saying we're all human, right? But by its affirmation, by each of us claiming the identities and cultural legacies that shape who we are and how we live in the world. Beloved community is not about erasing difference. It's not about making us all the same. That's one of the perversions that I see when I hear people talk about Dr. King's work, when they're like, well, he said we were going to erase, we're not going to see black or white. That's not actually what he meant, right? It's like we can see it, we can embrace it, and we can celebrate all of the cultures without lifting one above another, not that it only happens when we make them all disappear and we make everything the same. So this is going to be our first breakout group practice. And I want to check and see if there are any questions about what I've shared before I start the breakout groups. And I'll tell you what we're doing in the breakout groups first. So one question is in the chat, and so going back to the previous slide. When the person is using shared humanity as a way to prioritize their comfort over lived impact, right? How do you call them in? Well, for me, it's exactly kind of naming that, right? So if we're talking about your comfort and I'm experiencing negative impact, I get to talk about that. I get to say, it looks like you're meeting these needs for comfort, for ease, for, just flow, for maybe even just like understanding the world in a way that makes sense to you. And it's not working for me. I am not experiencing ease. I am struggling. I'm not having my needs met. And I could name all the needs that I'm not met. And so we stay in dialogue with me continuing to name what is not being met for me and for others, and inviting them, demanding that they continue to work with me until they can come up with a new strategy that still supports their needs for comfort, but also the needs that I'm trying to raise. So part of beloved community is staying in that dialogue so that we can find strategies that truly work for everyone. So when somebody is only prioritizing their comfort, it's at my expense. It's not holding the whole. It's their needs over mine. That's not beloved community. I am not actually super attached to like whatever language we use. I love people to find a language, and this is really important to me. I tell people all the time, find a language that resonates with you and use as a litmus test, is my language demonizing one person over another, one group over another? And if it isn't, then I try to make sure that I find a different language that still resonates with my community, but takes away some of that judgment. Love this question in the chat. How do white people suffer because of racism? Can I share a small example, right? Well, one of the ways, and this is an example that had a lot of resonance to me. When my family came to the United States, my mom worked as a live-in housekeeper, nanny for a white family who had a lot of resources. And so every week she would leave our family and she would go to that family and she would live there and stay there for the whole week. And then she would come back. And my friend talks about what this could have been like and what I imagine. I imagine what it was like for my mom and for the kids in this family. So my mom was their primary caretaker for many, many years, right? So she was the person that was beloved. My mom is an amazing mom. So there was a lot of reasons why these little children would love my mom. So imagine them looking at my mom, who's this wonderful, caring person, loves them, holds them, soothes them, right? And as they grow up, they realize that my mom is seen as less than. My mom is seen as uneducated, not good enough, poor, all of these things, the person who can be ordered around. So there's this dissonance for these children around this person who takes care of me, who loves me, who makes me feel good. The person who says it's okay to cry and soothes me is not okay, is not seen as fully human. And now, if I want to be fully human, do I adopt that status? Does being human mean I have to adopt this lesser than status in society? Do I have to suppress all of my feelings, suppress my um, capacity to love? Or do I go with this kind of very, if I want to belong in my community as a white person, do I say, okay, I have to put down this person. I have to see them as less than human. I have to, in some ways, kill a part of myself, the part that says, I love other people in order to buy belonging in my community. Do I have to agree with my friends who start to shame this person and talk rudely to them? Do I have to adopt these really negative ways of treating people in order to find belonging? And a lot of people do. A lot of people do. A lot of people have to cast out the folks who were taking care of them because that was the cost of finding belonging in their community. And in casting it out, they also have to cast out the soft, tender parts of them, the parts that say, I want to hold compassion. I want to take care of other people who have less than me. And that's a huge cost. That's a huge cost. When I see people in my practice as a psychologist, I see people who struggle with, I don't know how to be fully embrace all of the gentle parts of me. I'm told that I have to be this kind of harsh, strong person, and that any sign of being human, of liking another person, of embracing another person's humanity means I'm weak. And they struggle. And yes, I love the way that you put that, Vika. If we or others can be cast out, then we ourselves can be cast out. When I see other people as less than, I'm always worrying, what will I do that will let me end up being cast out? And so people go through life feeling insecure, feeling scared, not ever trusting that they belong. And that is one of the huge costs of white supremacy, the idea that I need to toe the line and buy into these beliefs, otherwise I can be cast out, right? And isn't that what white supremacy culture does nowadays? We call anybody who's trying to be inclusive as snowflakes. They don't deserve to be treated the same, and we cast them out, right? It's like they're no longer good white folks. Okay, so breakout rooms. So in your small groups, I want you to think about ways that you have responded to expressions of bias in the past. And as you think about them, what role did moralistic judgments play in your response? And if you were holding an intention for beloved community, how might that have shaped your response? And then the last thing I want you to consider, because we all of us, might have resistance towards beloved community. So when you think about somebody displaying bias against you, where do you see that you have resistance to the idea of beloved community? And how does it serve you? What is it protecting? Okay, so microassaults are the easiest kinds of microaggressions. Most people recognize them. Most people will acknowledge that they're happening because they're also not the ones that are easy to pretend didn't happen. Someone calls me the N-word, we all heard it, right? The next category is micro insults. And these basically convey a subtle snub about a person. So they convey stereotypes, insensitivities, they demean the person's identities. And so it might be something like, if I walk into the store and the person says to me, do you need to know how much this costs? What's the subtle message there? Because microaggressions always have a subtle message. So if someone walks up to me and says, do you need to know how much this costs? Somebody either put it into the chat or just unmute and say it. What's the message there? So all of those, right? You're Black and you can't afford it. Maybe even you can't read. Like there are a lot of subtle messages there. And now the question came up, well, what if it's the person's just being too sensitive, right? Maybe this clerk has been trained to ask every single person who walks into the store, do you want to know where the sales items are? As the Black person walking into the store, I don't know that that's what they're doing. I don't know this at all. And so microaggressions are about the receiver. And an important thing that I won't go into a lot today is that when a microaggression happens, there's always what happened externally, what the person said. Do you want to know where the sales rack is, right? There could be a lot of reasons why the person said that. But the reason it lands as a microaggression for me is because I'm also acknowledging all the other times I've walked into the store and people followed me around and didn't follow anyone else around and kept insisting on trying to show me the sales rack, right? So it might not have been this instance of that, but I'm also remembering all the other times that this happened. I'm also remembering all of the times that folks assume Black folks aren't good tippers, don't have purchasing powers, and are there to steal things. And so it's not just the fact that you said something that may or may not have had a perfectly logical, wonderful reason for saying it. Microaggressions are happening in a larger context. And the larger context is the context that you might not be aware of as the white person or as the person who's making the microaggression. It doesn't mean that context doesn't exist. And so part of the invitation when someone says, hey, that was a microaggression, is to ask yourself, what am I not seeing? What's the context that I'm not aware of? What's the thing that wouldn't be visible for me because I've never been followed around in a store, right? Or no one's ever like hounded me around, do you have enough money? Can I see your credit card? Can I check your credit card and make sure it's legit before I use it? You know, all of the things that happen when I walk into stores. So it's not just the thing that the person says that we're judging whether or not it's a microaggression alone. It's also the larger context in which it's taking place. And that's why the piece that I said about the difference in social power is important, because that difference in social power is also giving us that context. So micro insults are always conveying this subtle message. And then the third kind of microaggressions are micro-invalidations, which basically seek to disconfirm, negate the experiences of members of certain groups. So the one that I love talking about is all lives matter equally, right? At this point, everyone on the call probably understands why that's a negation of the experiences of certain groups, but it's so important to talk about. First, there is nothing in saying something like Black Lives Matter that says white lives don't matter, right? There's absolutely nothing in that message. And when we say Black Lives Matter, what we're also saying is, and Black lives have not mattered in this society and in this context that we're living in. And when you say all lives matter, you're not just saying, I want to be seen that white lives matter. You're also saying the idea that Black lives have not mattered, that there's been discriminatory treatment, is unimportant. And so it's that negating of the experiences of an entire group that's important. That's the subtle message that's being conveyed when microinvalidations happen, right? And I included on the slides not just racial microaggressions, but other examples of microaggressions, because sometimes, depending on your identity, one of them might click easier for you, and then you'll be able to apply it to thinking about racial microaggressions. And now a couple of folks had asked questions around, can you give me an example? Can we get some more examples? And so I'll take a couple that had been in the chat. So this most recent one, you don't belong here, right? Or the one that a version of this that comes up along is, where are you from? Where are you from? Where you're from has that subtle message, you don't belong here. So whenever you go up to somebody and you say, where are you from? Something about that person is making you think that they're not from wherever you're from, right? Again, it could be that you live in a community, an intentional community. I just visited a lovely intentional community, and you know every single person in that community. And so you walk up to the person who's clearly not in that community and say where you're from. It's possible. But if you say that to me, I don't know that that's your experience, right? What I do know is that whenever I walk into spaces, people automatically assume I'm not from there, right? Or I don't belong there, or I'm not there to teach, or I'm not there to do whatever it is I'm there to do. And so I get that a lot. Where are you from? Why are you here? How can I help you? Which are all subtle messages that convey the idea you are not part of this community, you don't belong, right? And when I talk about the impact of subtle things that seem really small, like where are you from and why it's so problematic, one of the big examples I like to talk about, and I've written about this on the website, on my personal website, roxannemanning.com, is what that message did during World War II. So the idea of walking up to somebody from Asia and saying where you're from is signaling that just because they look Asian, we have a metric in our head of what people from the United States look like. And people from the United States are not Asian. And so if you look white, you very rarely get that, where are you from? If you look Asian, people might ask you that a lot because the assumption is Asian folks must not be from the United States. People might argue, well, this is a really small thing. It's not that big a deal, right? But when World War II happened, there were a lot of people of German descent in the United States and a lot of people of Japanese descent in the United States. And the folks from German descent were generally white. The folks from Japan were Asian. Who was put in concentration camps, in internment camps in the United States, right? There was absolutely no reason, if we believed that internment camps were necessary, that Germans weren't also put into internment camps. But the rate was astronomically different, and it was solely based on this external physical appearance that was ticking off this "you're not from the United States" box, right? So these little things have huge impacts, have huge consequences for many people. The other example of a microaggression, and I'm going to ask you all to play with this now. Someone had said in the chat earlier, I'm in a new community, I miss my Black friends. If I walk up to a Black person and say, hey, I miss my Black friends, would you like to be my friend? Why would that be a microaggression? Does anybody have an idea, first, what category of microaggression this might be? Is it a microassault, a micro-insult, or a micro-invalidation?
Invalidation and fetishizing.
Yeah, invalidation, and say a little bit more about why invalidation.
Because I seeing them as fulfilling a role for somebody else, not as a individual, like complete human being with their own agency.
Right. So we're in part way negating the full experience of that person, right? Their whole lived experience, what matters to them, what's important to them, and saying, you are here to help me kind of get my fix for being around white folks, being around Black folks. And that's now your purpose for existing. I mean, just think of how minimizing, invalidating that is. And it's very different if you walked up to me and said, I love crocheting and I see you've got crochet hooks in your hand. Would you like to be friends, right? Because now there's some reason that's about me that you're connecting to. But if it's just like I look a certain way and you automatically assume that A, I want a friend, B, I'm willing to be friends with you, it's really an interesting way of tokenizing, like you said, and invalidating the agency and wants of an entire person. Does that help also, the person who had asked that question earlier?
Yes, and I feel terrible. I had no idea I was doing that, which really is painful.
Yeah, and I always tell people, one of the challenges, one of the huge challenges and opportunities of doing this work is when we recognize that the things that we were doing with full innocence might have stimulated a lot of pain for another person, right?
Well, I definitely owe an amends to one of them who I can contact, because
And we might not get to talk about that in this class tonight, but I would also say be really mindful about that, because even the idea of making amends to somebody can also be seen, not necessarily, but also be seen as you helping yourself feel better, right? It's like, I feel bad and now I need forgiveness. I need to feel better. I might not want amends. I might be like, I just want to pretend that didn't happen and let's start over and keep going on. And, let's put that aside because it's painful to think about. And bringing it up again reminds me once again that I was seen as an other. And once again, I now have to engage with it. And there's a whole challenge around how to navigate that. So it's a very tricky thing. I always say, get consent to see if the person actually wants to engage in a reparation conversation with you. Don't assume that they do.
no, I always ask permission when I make an
Great.
amend. Yeah, it's a 12-step thing.
Wonderful. So some challenges. Oh, yeah, thank you for that example of the doubling down of the where you really from piece to the where you're from question, right? If somebody tells you they're from there, never, ever, ever ask, no, really. Just don't, okay? And I want to give you a quick teaser if you haven't read the book. If you heard about it this past summer, there was that, was it this past summer? There was a whole thing that blew up on the internet. I guess it wasn't this summer because the books were written last year. I wrote about this situation in the book that blew up on the internet where the lady in waiting for Prince Charles and the Queen had asked that "where you from" question of a Black woman at an event that was meant to celebrate minority work. And I kind of unpack that and give examples of dialogue. So if you want to see that "where you from" question and how badly it goes, it's in the book. Okay, so challenges of responding to microaggressions. So the first challenge is that they're often invisible, right? Because they're invisible, because I don't even see that they're happening, the person who's receiving them is going, is this in my head? Am I too sensitive? Am I the problem? Or did something actually happen? And especially when nobody else responds, you're really left kind of swirling. It's kind of crazy making. So the fact that they're invisible, the person who did it doesn't know that they did it, no one else is responding, it's hard. Second challenge is that people are always minimizing it. It's not that big a deal. Just blow it off. Ignore it, right? So the idea that it's a microaggression and therefore micro in impact. We know there's a ton of research that shows that microaggressions are not micro in impact. And people ask, why do we call them microaggressions? And in fact, that was part of the reason that people wanted to say, this is an aggression with all of the impact, all of the trauma that results from experiencing aggressions, even if it's happening at this interpersonal, not this macro level. But it's still something that leads to depression, anxiety, PTSD, a lot of physical disabilities, right? So microaggressions have a huge impact, and the impact is cumulative over time. But most people don't see that. They're seeing, okay, so they ask where you're from, just brush it off, ignore them, go to the next thing, right? And then the third big challenge is the catch-22. If I try to speak up about something that people didn't recognize and they think it's pretty minor, am I putting a target on my back now? Are people going to say, oh, you're the sensitive person, or you're the person who's always playing the race card? And all of a sudden, I'm no longer belonging in the group. If I don't speak up about it, am I sitting with all of this almost like self-hatred and internalizing some of these beliefs, the sense that I don't have my own back, no one's helping me, and the hopelessness and despair that that brings? And so the person who has to respond to it, especially the receiver, is often navigating what are the costs of trying to respond. I was going to put y'all into another breakout group, but let's see. I think we can, because I want y'all to practice really thinking about the different kinds of microaggressions. So the next breakout group, there we go. I want you to think about a racial microaggression that you've experienced or witnessed. And for this example, I want you to pick one where there was a clear receiver or actor, okay? So clear receiver or actor. And I'm going to put into the chat, remember I told you all earlier that there was the Wikipedia that gives lots of examples of microaggressions? So I added that to the chat so that you can find it. So you can click on that link if you want to get an example and choose one from the Micropedia, or you could just use one that you've experienced or witnessed yourself. And then in your groups, you'll pick in one of the examples that someone has, and then try to identify what is the type of microaggression that's there. And more importantly, because this is what's going to help you understand why something is landing as a microaggression for somebody, I want you to identify what is the hidden message. If somebody says to me, you're so articulate, right? The microaggression there is that, oh, Black folks are not supposed to be smart. And we're surprised that a person like you, who looks like you, would either be educated enough or, what's the word? Now I'm not articulate because I'm talking about it, or articulate enough to name things in this way. So the hidden message is Black people are not supposed to have this level of education and awareness, right? So for each microaggression, I want you to think, what is that hidden message? Okay, so welcome back. Did anybody have any questions about any of the examples where you're not fully sure that it was a microaggression or not?
Roxy, can you just describe micro assault again?
Yeah, so micro assaults are kind of like the very blatant, obvious, old-fashioned kinds of discrimination.
Okay.
So it's things like name calling or deliberately, like explicitly, like I am not going to sit next to that person, or you can't sit at this table. I've gone into restaurants where I just was never served, no matter how long I sat there until I walked out half an hour later, right? So those would be examples of micro assault. So very deliberate, obvious kinds of like microaggressions. So now I want to talk about just like a really brief overview of what to do when we're experiencing it. So the first piece is, what do you do if you're the receiver of the microaggression, right? You've been the target of it. And as I mentioned earlier, one of the things that's really important to me is that the receiver knows that they get to choose. They have to decide, is this actually a good time for me to speak up? Because there's a lot of cost for the receiver quite often when they try to speak up. So one of the things that I always start off with are the circumstances okay? And do you have the emotional resources to speak up? If you're reeling because someone just said something horrendous to you, you might not have the capacity to speak up in the way that you want, that really is bringing in beloved community, or you might not even have the awareness yet. Like, I need help in just understanding what happened so I could name what happened and what I'm experiencing. So slow down, get empathy, or give yourself empathy if you need it, so that you have clarity going into this. And I'm also going to pause here and say, even though I said all of that, like I'm inviting the receiver to slow down, check in, and make sure this is the best time for them, I also like to take this moment to talk about that difference between calling in and calling out, right? So sometimes if I'm the receiver, I am like fed up to hear. And I have been trying and trying and trying my best to name what's been happening, and no one is listening to me. No, nothing is changing. And so I'm just like dumping, or I'm just saying it with all of the intensity and anger and everything that's in me. And I want to make clear that that is also okay, right? For those of you on the call who practice nonviolent communication, if somebody comes to you with a lot of intensity, a lot of anger, maybe even a lot of judgment, this is your chance to practice empathy, to say, wow, this person has a lot going on. What is it what needs are not met for them? What are they trying to let me know? And to really go there. Don't start judging the person and telling them, oh, you need to say it in a certain way, or I can't hear you unless you say it in a way that I can hear. Because that's once again going back to that old white supremacy trope that people of color can't make white people angry, and we need to only talk about it in ways that are comfortable and easy for them to hear. So if somebody expresses with a lot of intensity, even if it's hard for you to hear, really take it as a gift. I always tell people that if I yell at you, it means I like you. Because when I don't like you and you do something I really don't like, I'm really likely to just be like, okay, I'm done with that person and walk away and never talk to you again, right? So my giving you my authentic, full expression, especially when it's full of pain, means that there's a level of trust. There is some degree of hope that I'm holding, that you might actually want to hear me and respond to what's going on for me. So if you can just take that, it might not always be true for everyone, but if you can take that as a possibility, that someone who's coming to you with a lot of intensity is giving you the gift, that there's a possibility that they think you might actually respond in a way that could lead to healing and repair, you might have more spaciousness to hear them, okay? So there's no demand that you have to do it this way. Speaking your authenticity is so important, okay? And then the other piece I also ask the receiver to think about is, are there other resources you can call in? Another belief of white supremacy is that we've got to do it all on our own, that we're individuals, siloed, experiencing everything on our own. And as long as we think we're alone, we diminish our power. So call in all the help that you can get. This is a great time to find those white folks who say they want to be allies and say, if you want to be ally, come take on some of this risk, right? Be the person to come and say some of the hard things. or to find the other global majority folks and say, I need some support, I need some backing. So pull in all of the resources you can to help you show up in the way that you want. And then the last consideration that I always want people to talk about, and this is true if you're the receiver or if you're the bystander, is to really think about the cost. I don't want anybody to do more than they're able to do in the moment. I don't want anyone to stretch themselves more than they're willing to bear in the long run. And for me, this was a really important insight from the work that Dr. King was doing, right? There was always this idea that people were willing to put themselves in harm's way, to put themselves like on the front lines where they can get beaten, where they can get killed for protesting, right? But it was always voluntary. It was always people saying, I'm aware of the needs that I want to meet in the long run. I'm aware of what's important, the vision that I'm working towards, and I'm willing to bear this cost. There was never a demand that the people who were not willing to bear that cost had to do it. If I'm a parent with children, I might not be willing to speak up about something that's happening if it means that I'm going to lose my job and not be able to take care of my children, right? That's a cost that I'm not going to ask anybody to bear unless they're choosing to do that. So it's always around acknowledging to yourself, what is the cost for me speaking up? What's the cost for other people speaking up if I speak up? And am I willing for me and for those others to bear the cost? Okay. So if you go through all of this and you realize this is not the time, I don't have the energy, I don't have the resources, or the consequences are too great, you don't have to speak in this moment. There are other things you can do as the receiver. Getting empathy, having somebody hear you, having somebody witness what was going on, having someone brainstorm with you around how can you survive what you're having to deal with. There are all ways that you can get support without having to speak up if that cost is too high. Does that make sense? Okay. So then another piece is, what about the actor? What do I do if I'm the actor? So for the actor, big message is, no matter what's going on inside of you, no matter what you believe is true, focus on the impact first. No matter what you do, focus on the impact first. One of the stories I tell is something that happened to me. I was leading a workshop, and it was primarily, I think, everyone in the workshop was a person of the global majority. And some of the folks, there were a couple of men who identified as Black men who were in the workshop. And something had happened, and in the middle of coming back from one of the breakout activities, I said something, and one of the men blew up, was incredibly angry, and said, Black women always put Black men down. You never pay attention to us, right? And was really clear that from his perspective, I was doing something that landed for him as a huge microaggression. I was really clear that I didn't do that. And in fact, I went back and I looked at the recording because I was like, did I? What am I not seeing? And I was really clear that the thing that he thought I did, I had not done. And my response was to empathize with his experience. Because what was more important was not whether or not I did the thing that he said I did, but if he had the experience for whatever reason that this is what I did, and he was impacted by it, I wanted to catch that impact. I wanted to connect with that impact because I was clear that the impact was not about whether or not I did the thing, but about the history that he was bringing to the room. It was about how many times he had experienced being put down, being invalidated as a Black man, and how painful that experience was for him. And so being able to catch him, to empathize with him, to really hold his experience non-defensively was important and was a moment of healing for him. And then after he had felt completely understood for the pain that he was experiencing in that moment, I asked, would you like to understand what it was that I said? Not because, and I was really clear, this is the important part, not because I needed to be seen for my intentions, but because I thought it might give him some relief and give him a sense of safety in the group to realize that it hadn't actually happened in that way. So it was important for him to both have a sense that the pain that he was experiencing was important and needed to be understood, connection first, and then for him to understand that this group actually is a place where you can trust that these things are less likely to happen. There's a difference between me wanting to give that information to him to support his sense of belonging in the group versus me wanting to share that so I felt like he was seeing me and I felt understood. Very different ask of him, because he didn't have to do anything to make me feel better. It was just, oh, okay, let me think on that. And then he could think on it and see if it shifts anything for his experience. This point feels really important to me about connection, even when you think you didn't do anything wrong, before correction or education. So I'm curious to hear from anyone what's coming up with you as you hear this point.
Roxy, one side point about that is how long it takes me to realize that something that I said that I would see as a neutral statement has impact. And I'm just thinking of a case in point where a black man who's a friend of mine sent me an article, and I didn't trust the writer of the article. And I wrote him back and said, this person is well known for writing false articles. And he came back with a long thing explaining the way he thought about this topic. And I just said, thank you for telling me that. I don't disagree with anything you're saying. And he did it like 3 times. And finally I went, whoa. And I just said to him, I want you to know how much I respect your research and your scholarship. I really value that. And I love that in our conversations, you bring so much of yourself to it. It took me several iterations for me to realize that I had done something.
Right. So that hidden message of, I don't trust your wisdom, your ability, and your discernment was really where he was trying to be seen. Absolutely. Yeah.
And just how long it took me to get it. That's the part.
But I think this is part of it, right? Because sometimes you don't get it at all. Sometimes the person doesn't write you and say, hey, wait a second, and push back against what you said. They just go silent. And that happens. That happens. And part of our journey is how can we hold compassion for ourselves as we raise our awareness about these areas, as we learn about the places where we have had impact, unintentional, and didn't see it. Because if one of the things that we often do when we recognize this is if we collapse. And then when you collapse, when you disappear, it means that for me as a Black person, I now have a choice. Do I ever tell you anything again? If it's going to mean loss of connection, loss of ever being met in a certain way, do I take that risk? And then the cycle continues. I stop telling you things. You stop becoming aware of your impact. Learning never happens. So still show up, still go back. You can go back 10 years later and say, hey, I realized I had an impact that I didn't notice back then. And if you ever want me to hear anything about that, I'm here and willing to listen. Right? It's just partly addressing you can go back and make repairs. You can give the person choices, you do it. And it also helps with this kind of crazy making place, right? Oh, finally somebody saw what happened. I'm not alone in this anymore. So when you notice that you've had impact, at least just own it. You don't have to dive into it. You don't have to go into a huge and I'm so sorry, I'm so guilty, I'm horrible. Don't do that. Just acknowledge, I did this thing. I know it had an impact and I'm here if you want me to hear you. And I also love this piece that's in the chat around the challenges when we are the actor, because as actors, we have our own experience, our own traumas, probably even our own experience with microaggressions, depending on the other aspects of our identities that will impact our capacity to show up for other people. I have my own, right? I have my own. And so the question is still, how can I take a pause and notice, is this about me in this moment, or is it about me acknowledging where I have structural power? where I have societal power, and choosing to show up in a different way. It's a work in progress. Okay, so going back to more about the actor. So some of the things I like to point out, and I think I've just demonstrated it in my example, is that sometimes the impact, often the impact, the intensity of the impact is not just because of the thing you said or did, that it's the weight of the experiences, the lived experiences this person has had, and the context that's contributing to the impact. So when you choose to defend against, I didn't say or do this thing, you're basically telling that person that their lived experience doesn't matter, that they're not allowed to have an impact from that lived experience, right? And we want to give people this idea that I'm not invalidating your experience, and I can hold. I had an impact that was the stimulus for all of this pain, and that pain gets to be held and acknowledged. So empathize fully with the impact, self-empathize as much as you can. Even take a pause from empathizing with the impact to say, I need just a few minutes so I can sit with myself so I can continue to show up in the way that I want. Take that time if you need to, so that you can stay focused on the impact. And then also recognize that if you need to be seen for your intention, there is no shame in that. You're human. We want to be seen for the wonderful things that we do, for the beautiful needs we're trying to meet. Absolutely no shame. It is not the receiver's responsibility to see you. So if you want to be seen, ask your friend, ask your empathy buddy, ask somebody else to notice and to acknowledge where you were coming from. Don't ask the receiver to do it. And then the third piece I want to go over, and then we're going to have I'll open it up for Q&As and questions, is what about the bystander? What do you do as the bystander, right? So the bystander, one of your big roles as a bystander is you get to jump in, if you can, and prevent harm. Lots of caveats about that, right? If you jump in to prevent harm, make sure that you're doing it, not because you're saying, that poor Black person is suffering and I want to prevent what's happening to them, but because you are connected to your own needs. I talked a little bit about caretaking in the book, right? So it's like you see something happening and you say, well, that must be horrible for that person, so you need to stop what you're doing, actor. When you do that, I have often experienced the actor turning to me and saying, you're not bothered by this, right? This is just a little thing. You're okay with what's happening. So if you intervene as a bystander by naming it as my problem, you're bringing me into a dialogue that I might not have wanted to be in. And you're putting me on the spot of either having to agree that this is problematic with all of the cost that I might have been trying to avoid in naming it, or I now have to lie and say, no, it's totally okay, with all of the pain and the kind of giving up on myself that engenders. So don't bring me into it. You can intervene as the bystander from connecting to your needs. You can say, I want everyone in our group to have a chance to speak. Would you be quiet for a moment so that other folks can speak? Without ever naming that it's I want to hear all the Black people speak, whether or not we're wanting to speak, or, this person's been raising their hand 5 million times. Take ownership of what you're wanting, what your needs are. And then you can also have different places where you can intervene. As a bystander, like I just mentioned, actors often need empathy for their intentions. I get it that the actors often are not at all aware of the impact that they're having, right? And so as a bystander, pull that actor aside, give that actor empathy. Do it so that as a receiver, I don't have to watch you giving empathy to the person while I'm still bleeding. But that person still needs empathy, and part of beloved community is that everybody gets what they need. So you can take that actor somewhere and give them empathy, and someone can empathize with me as the receiver so that everyone is getting held with care. That's a great role for a bystander, especially for a bystander from the same group as the actor. Chris, question?
Yeah, I find that really hard to do with, I put it in the Q&A of folks that feel very entitled to people teaching them and that are continually perpetrating harm, like microaggressions in a group setting, in an organizational setting, to then spend my energy and labor. I mean, and I'm experiencing microaggressions too, to then educate them when they are already entitled and give them empathy when they are expecting other people to teach them, but not interested in doing their own work.
Absolutely. So that's my other form of engaging with the actor. So when you engage with the actor as a bystander, one of the things you could be doing is giving them empathy. The other thing you could be doing is educating them. The third thing you could be doing is saying, my friend, do you notice that this has come up in every single meeting at work? Every single meeting, someone is telling you that you're doing something that's causing harm and it's not changing. Here's a class, go take it. Or here's some work that you need to do to gain the skills so that you stop creating this harm. So just like even just pointing them to a resource and not doing the work yourself could be something that you do. If you are experiencing the microaggression yourself, if you're the receiver of the microaggression, then this isn't the thing that I would say that you would do as a bystander. This is what I'm speaking to someone ideally in the same group who wants to be an ally to the people who are experiencing the microaggressions. Because if that person continues, if that actor continues to do microaggressions over and over and over and are not learning, if you don't intervene as an ally, then it basically falls on the folks of the global majority, the folks who are the receivers, to be the ones to intervene. So this is why I say, yes, it's exhausting. Yes, it's infuriating. And it is one of the ways that you could serve and support the folks of color, the folks who are the receivers who otherwise are alone in having to do that work. So take some of the burden off of them. Shayla?
Thank you, Roxy. This is very illuminating. And I can say, as someone who's been working in this field for a while and still has so much to learn, I'm noticing something that it seems like part of the code of white supremacy that we're not aware of a lot of the time is it's like elevating myself in certain ways, like and not being able to land in the simple kind of realities that you're pointing to. Like there's like an attempt to like, you know, when instead of doing what you said about being clear about my own needs when I intervene, like that move that happens so often of I'm doing this for you, I'm trying to save you, like that feels like part of the code of white supremacy. And I'd love you to just, if you want to say something about that, because I'm really feeling it in this moment.
Yeah, I mean, I think you've actually named it, right? That there is a way that even as the bystander, it's easy for me to take this isn't me. I'm not impacted by this. I'm not touched by this. And so to take that stance when I'm trying to help, or to take the stance of, I am going to speak up to show that I am not that person. I am a wonderful, good person who would never do this thing. And I often say this, don't virtue signal with all of the judgment that's embedded in that term, because there's this idea of, if I'm going to jump in and try to intervene so that you see that I am one of the good people, that's still a burden for me. It's still not helping me, because the minute I think that I need to reassure you that you're the good person, I'm no longer with what my pain is. I'm now taking care of you. And so to be really rigorously authentic about, what am I trying to accomplish here? What's motivating me? Why am I choosing to act? Is really huge.
Yes, that's the kind of humility that I'm feeling. It's like a rigorous process of being so real that it just brings us down out of the need to elevate ourselves. Thank you, Roxy.
You're welcome. And there's a piece that I'll say, that even when you do all of this, the receiver might say, I don't want your help. Thank you, but no, right? And that's another important thing to accept, that for a lot of bystanders, you know your intentions. You might even know the spirit in which you're trying to intervene. But as a receiver, I don't know you. I don't know where you're coming from. I don't know what the cost is going to be for me of letting you help me in this way. And so it's an act of faith for me to accept help from a random person I don't know when microaggressions are happening. And so I really want folks to both take all of that risk of trying, knowing that you might be rebuffed, knowing that you might not be met and embraced in the way that you would like. Because isn't that the risk that the receiver takes on all the time? That I'm always walking into spaces not knowing, am I going to be rebuffed? Am I going to be pushed away? So it's always about taking on that risk that you're going to get it wrong, that it's not going to work for someone, that they're going to tell you did more harm than good. And I always tell people that when you do that, if you get the message you did more harm than good, then you get to start over. You get to now have that as the thing that you look at, the thing that you unpack, that you try to explore. It's never like, oh, I'm now out of the game forever. Just go back in and try, continue to learn. So I'm going to pause here because I want to save just even a few minutes for questions and comments and questions about anything that I shared. Again, this was like the very briefest overview of a 10-hour class. So I'm hoping that it still gave you a lot of takeaways and things to noodle on. And I also just want to see what kinds of questions you have about this content or about the book. Resources on tokenization and how bystanders can respond. I don't off the top of my head. I think it's something like when I work with organizations, it's something I talk about when I teach, but I don't think I've developed anything, and I'm not aware of anything to point to in the moment. I can just say in general, a really great book, just in general for looking at anti-racist work in organizations is DEI Deconstructed. So if you haven't come across that book, really lovely book. Other questions or comments? Patrice.
I'm really sitting with, I so appreciate a couple of things. I so appreciate the, hey, I, person who was targeted, did not say, I want to be dragged into this. I get to decide when and if and how. My cost benefit analysis of speaking up, my sense of what the cost could be.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm kind of like, for the bystander who's wanting to, there's a part of me that's trying to sit with the whole, as a white person, there's cost to you to this as well.
Mm-hmm.
And really framing your intervention around the cost to you, not the perceived or projected cost to the person of color. And I don't have any answers around that, but that's what's I'm sitting with.
Yeah. I think there is no answer to that. I think there's something that's, even for me, as a person from the global majority, there's almost like a tenderness that I start to feel when I think about the cost and the risk and the vulnerability for white folks trying to move in this space, right? And if I can think about that, it doesn't mean that I'm going to be like, yes, do whatever you want, and I'm okay with, absorbing any harms in your attempt. But I still get why it's scary. I still get why it's hard. And I feel more willing to show up myself and to be authentic and be real and tell you when this isn't working so that we're all on this learning journey together.
Oh yeah, and I know what the other thing was. When you had said that you didn't use the term tone policing, but sometimes someone who's been impacted will say the thing and they might be loud or intense or some other way, which makes it more difficult for your central nervous system to listen to them. But the whole thing of like, you can only say if it's nice and pretty and wrapped up and everything.
Mm-hmm.
The thing that, oh, and you said, oh, I really love you because another thing that came up to me when you were right, that's what it was. Somehow I feel somewhat, safe is too much of a word, but somehow I feel like there's a possibility that you might hear me, that I'm speaking up. And so please understand that, like,
Patrice, you just went quiet.
Yeah, because a lot of emotion came up.
Ah.
Please understand that there are so many places where under no circumstances would I say anything. So the very fact that with my shaky, quivery voice that maybe is louder than you want it to be, I'm actually trying to say, ouch. Please keep that in mind.
Yes.
I might not love you and I don't know you, but still there's something going on where I'm thinking maybe, just maybe, this could be received.
I'm so glad that you're emphasizing that again, because I think people don't often see how much pain is underneath the anger when I'm expressing, and how much there's still this idea that this is the one place where I might actually be able to be real, right? You're getting my realness in this moment. And there's so many places where I absolutely can't. I put into the chat the link for the DEI constructed book that I just referenced. And part of the reason I gave you that link, it's my publisher's link actually, and they're having a 30% off sale. And I think it continues through this week. So if you wanted to get that book, order it through them and you can get that 30% off. And I think it's 30% off with free shipping. And then you can also order my books at the same time. Okay. Marcia, because you haven't spoken yet, and then we'll look at Vika.
Feedback, Roxy, is that I so appreciate your compassion and that I'm leaving feeling refreshed and energized and uncomfortable. There's a great deal of shame and pain that has been stirred up, and I'm grateful for that. It feels like it's a movement toward growth. It's shame and pain of both being on the receiving end of microaggressions and also the shame and pain of being helpless, of acting like I'm helpless as a bystander. And then also where I've been the actor, and and I look forward to taking your longer class sometime. And I will purchase books not only for myself, but for some friends. And when, there was that early purchase, I think I kind of fell down on my end because I think that my credit card got compromised and I didn't follow back up with you. So anyway, just to let you know.
No worries. Thank you very much, Marcia. One of the big lessons from all of this is that we need to hold ourselves with self-compassion, whichever role that we're in, because this is not easy. This is not ever going to be easy. Someone had asked in the chat, where do you order my books? I've just put a link into the chat for the bundle at my publisher's site. And you can also, of course, purchase either one of them separately. If you click on my name, if you go to that link, then I'll show you the book separately. And I think, I'm not 100% sure, but the bundle is supposed to be discounted, and then you get 30% off the discounted. So it's a really good time to buy both. Vika.
I just want to thank you. I got exactly what I was hoping for and a lot more. The clarity that I have is very powerful, and I really have some clear understanding of like what I need to do next in order to be an ally and, just go forward. So I feel very, very grateful.
Thank you. And so now, Patrice, yes, Patrice put a Black independent bookstore link into the chat. Yes. Please also try to order it from there. Love the independent bookstores. And I'll also say one last thing then as we're closing. Please do purchase the books. And the biggest challenge for me right now, which I mentioned at the beginning of the call is getting negative comments from people who will never read the books and don't like the topic. So we have a big plea that if you purchase the books and you read them and you like them, even if you don't like them, go to goodreads.com and leave a rating. And if you can leave, like, I really actually am fine if you leave a 1 rating saying, I hate these books, if that's where you truly are, as long as you've read the books. But we already have like somebody who gave us a 1 and hadn't read the books as far as we could tell, because very few people have the books. So we're asking everyone that it actually makes a huge difference in getting the books out there. If you purchase the books and in the next 2 weeks, if you leave ratings, because there's something about getting like 100 ratings in the first couple of weeks that makes a difference. This is all very new to me, but we're encouraging folks, get the books, go leave a rating. And hope to, oh yes, just get it from your local library. Go to my website if you want to find out about the longer microaggressions course. And also make sure that you come back for the other free book launch events that are happening this week, and like share the links with everyone you know. Thank you everyone for being with me for my first celebratory, actually my second. I gave an impromptu book reading at an intentional community. That was my very first book launch event. That was really fun. So you're my second. Thank you for joining me.